Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Alice Tang, in for Tiffany Meyer. Our top story. President Trump warning Iran of dire consequences if Houthi attacks continue. A look at how the Chinese regime uses Iran to support the terrorist group. President Trump's tariffs, how do they impact small businesses in the U.S.? A look at the pros and cons.
In fact, it's helping us because we're made here in the United States.
It just all makes business less stable and less predictable. But at the end of the day, the costs are passed on.
And is China preparing for another pandemic? Mobile pop-up hospitals are getting reported inside China, along with large orders for bird flu test kits and medical drills across the country. The moves echoing those from the COVID-19 pandemic. On Monday, President Donald Trump warned Iran it would face dire consequences if Houthi rebels continue their attacks. The Iran-backed terrorist group has been attacking American ships and global shipping operations in the Red Sea. How exactly is Iran linked to the Houthis, and who supports Iran? This comes after the U.S. military launched airstrikes on the Houthis in Yemen Saturday, killing multiple Houthi leaders. Under the leadership of those people, Houthis have been attacking ships passing through the Red Sea. It has forced those ships to continue to choose other routes, causing delays and other disruptions to global shipping. Houthi rebels control a third of Yemen, giving the group access to the Red Sea, a key maritime route for global trade. About 10% of global trade passes through this area. That's because the Red Sea route greatly shortens the distance between Asia and Europe. The Houthis get backing from Iran, but how does China come into play? China is the largest buyer of Iranian oil, which is Iran's biggest source of revenue. In 2024, over 90% of Iranian oil exports went to China, evading U.S. sanctions. That's according to nonprofit group United Against Nuclear Iran. Iran then sends parts of that oil revenue to its proxies, including the Houthis. Besides oil, China also called on the U.S. to lift its sanctions on Iran. This as Trump demanded that Iran negotiate a deal to prevent the country from acquiring nuclear weapons. Trump said Iran is too close to developing a nuclear bomb. Tehran said its nuclear programs is for peaceful purposes. Other than supporting Iran, the Chinese Communist regime has also supported the Houthis in other ways. Chinese and Iranian suppliers helped the terrorist group acquire materials used to make and deploy missiles against the U.S. The Treasury Department has sanctioned 3 companies and 1 individual related to that case. Houthi officials have also spoken to Chinese and Russian officials, largely to make sure Houthi militants do not strike Chinese vessels transiting the Red Sea. China also hosted a Houthi delegation in 2016, and a Chinese oil field service firm signed a brief deal with the Houthis in 2023. Headlines have been dominated with updates on tariffs and trade. How do they impact small businesses in the U.S.? They burden some and help others. NTD's Andrew Thompson has more on one manufacturer who says his business is benefiting from the president's policies and becoming more competitive in the face of goods from other countries, including China.
Noblesville, Indiana is home to the Luxury Pergola, a family-owned manufacturer of the outdoor structures. President and CEO Scott Elmore says he's very optimistic about the future, but he also remembers the struggle his community experienced when he was a kid.
I grew up in a small manufacturing town in east central Indiana that was literally hollowed out by globalization. So all the jobs that used to support middle-class families in that town were taken to either Mexico or China.
Elmore says that experience made him want to invest at home.
I did not want to contribute to that anymore. So it was important to us, important to me personally, to create as many jobs as possible here in the States.
Elmore says he obtains his raw materials, particularly aluminum, from American companies. Sourcing domestically exempts him from the potential tariffs that his competitors who source from abroad will face.
In fact, it's helping us because we're made here in the United States. So the only people that hurts are my competitors that are shipping in raw aluminum extrusions from overseas. So now their product is going to cost 25% more than it did before. That means I'm more competitive.
Elmore says Trump's tariffs will protect American industry. Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
On the other hand, businesses that rely on made-in-China products are feeling the pain of higher tariffs. Electric bike store The New Wheel in San Francisco is one of them. Here's what the shop CEO had to say.
Almost certainly manufactured in China. This saddle, I would guess, is as well. Like things that you're pretty familiar with. This is made in China.
The New Wheel also repairs thousands of e-bikes every year. That means new tariffs on both China and Europe are making it harder for them to get parts from batteries to spokes, fenders, all the way down to nuts and bolts. Wiener said it's now difficult to find a version of almost any part that was manufactured in the US. Zooming out, who's eating those costs at the end of the day?
It just all makes business less stable and less predictable. So if I tell a customer, oh, it's going to take this amount of time to get a part, well, I might be wildly off base if the whole production planning and logistical time frame has changed. But at the end of the day, the costs are passed on.
Now to the big picture. China exports much more than it imports from other countries. Last year, China reached a new high in its trade surplus, almost $1 trillion. That's 30 times higher than the same figure from 20 years ago. Looking at a specific case, China exported more goods to Brazil than to any other country, followed by Thailand and the United States. Is China preparing for another pandemic? China is boosting preventative health measures nationwide. Some cities are bringing makeshift hospitals back. The large isolation facilities once appeared all over the country during the COVID-19 pandemic. One province in southern China is hosting auctions for medical supplies. As for what they're bidding on, test kits designed to detect bird flu in humans. We also previously reported that China is seeing an uptick in medical drills across the country, focused on scenarios involving human cases of bird flu.
For the past 3 months, social media posts have been reporting rising deaths among respiratory patients, including young and middle-aged people. A city in northern China issued a notice a few weeks ago outlining a blueprint for a massive makeshift hospital the size of 10 football fields. A week ago, some Chinese internet users were using live streams to urge people to pay attention to human cases of bird flu. They said bird flu human infections are breaking out across China. Previously, whistleblowers inside China told us that many makeshift hospitals for bird flu patients were being built across the country. Those reports noted the structures are being built far from populated areas, so they're hard to spot. Separate sources from China's CDC sector and China's preventive medical supply chains told us that some of the facilities are already in operation. NTD concealed their identities for safety reasons. Beyond local reports, official documents show that China's southwestern Yunnan province opened an auction to hire medical suppliers starting Monday. The province is reportedly seeking to stockpile, include test kits for various strains of bird flu. Over in eastern China's Anhui province, emergency medical drill just wrapped up Monday. According to official reports, China's military force from its Eastern Theater plus other state-level experts participating in the medical drill. China has a history of covering up major public health crises, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. We'll keep you updated on the public health situation inside China as it develops. Flora Hua, NTD News.
An update from Taiwan. Taipei will deepen military cooperation with the United States, including intelligence sharing and holding joint tabletop exercises. The message comes from the island's defense ministry in a Tuesday report. This statement comes after dozens of Chinese aircraft surrounded Taiwan the day before. Taiwan's defense ministry released footage of Chinese military exercises. Taiwan released footage of Chinese military exercises near the island on Monday, saying Beijing sent 54 military planes to patrol near the island. Taiwanese air and naval forces were dispatched to keep watch. Beijing said the exercises were punishment for the Taiwanese president's continued promotion of what China calls separatism. Taiwan responded saying the Chinese Communist Party has been threatening Taiwan militarily and escalating tensions in the region, and called China a troublemaker. The CCP has never ruled Taiwan but claims the island as its own territory and has threatened to forcibly take it over. On the other hand, Taiwan strongly objects to China's sovereignty claims. It says only the island's people can decide their future. Taiwan is governed by a democratically elected president and its own constitution. The United States is Taiwan's most important international backer and arms supplier. The U.S. has been following a so-called strategic ambiguity. It has never promised to defend Taiwan in case of a Chinese invasion, but it's also never denied it would step in. The policy's goal is to keep the status quo in the region. That's by deterring China from invading Taiwan, and on the other side, by not encouraging Taiwan to announce independence. Such a declaration would mark an unacceptable red line for Beijing, but with tensions in the region escalating, Washington's strategy is becoming increasingly controversial. Coming up, some Melbourne residents have received unusual letters offering rewards for information on Hong Kong activists living in Australia. The country's foreign minister expressing concerns to China.
The Australian government does not accept other governments interfering with our citizens, making anybody feel unsafe.
Britain's opposition party leader warns the goal of zero carbon emission will make the country dangerously reliant on China. This as the UK and China agree to restart climate talks. And China is boosting its ocean-based aggression as the US faces a problem.
If the United States is unable to correct its shipbuilding problems and China continues to build out its fleet aggressively, that's going to pose that poses a serious geopolitical challenge for us in any situation where the United States and China might be at loggerheads.
What can America do? More on that after the break here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Alice Tang, in for Tiffany Meyer. Is Beijing making an attempt to infiltrate Australia? Australia's foreign minister said she raised concerns with China over anonymous letters sent to her citizens offering a reward for information on the whereabouts of a Hong Kong dissident who fled to Australia. Last year, many pro-democracy activists left Hong Kong due to Beijing's suppression of the freedom in the city. The Chinese Communist Party put some of them on a wanted list.
The Australian government does not accept other governments interfering with our citizens, making anybody feel unsafe. We expect our citizens to be respected, and we stand firm against any foreign interference and against any infringement of our sovereignty. I'll await whatever investigations come to light, but I have made my view about Australians being targeted by the Hong Kong authorities very clear to both Hong Kong and to China.
Some Australian residents received the letters late last week. They offer $130,000 for information about an Australian citizen and Hong Kong pro-democracy activist wanted by Hong Kong authorities for organizing protests in 2019. Local media reported the letters were mailed from Hong Kong and contained contract details for the Hong Kong police. Wong says the Australian government has been expressing its concerns through the usual diplomatic channels.
Britain's opposition party leader has a warning. Net zero climate goals could make Britain dangerously reliant on China. The lawmaker adds these goals can't be achieved by 2050 without reducing quality of life or bankrupting the country. This comes as the UK's net zero secretary returns from his trip to China. Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero is a new position in the UK. It was created 2 years ago alongside a new department with the same name. The department focuses on cutting greenhouse gas emissions. NTD's international correspondent Malcolm Hudson has the story.
Britain's Conservative Party leader Kemi Badenoch warned that net zero makes the UK dangerously dependent on China. Net zero refers to the plan to reduce carbon emissions, such as by using renewable energy sources rather than oil and gas, or shifting to electric cars. Badenoch said achieving net zero by 2050 is impossible.
Anyone who has done any serious analysis knows it cannot be achieved without a significant drop in our living standards, or worse, by bankrupting us.
Her statement comes as Energy Security and Net Zero Secretary Ed Miliband returns from his trip to China. The UK and China agreed to restart formal climate talks. They also agreed to enhance cooperation on renewables, on energy grid modernization and on clean technologies, but Badenoch warned against this.
We are massively exposing ourselves to countries who do not share our values. Look at the top dozen makers of solar panels. They are nearly all Chinese. That's an extraordinary dependency, given what we learned during COVID about over-reliance on these supply chains.
She said the same is true for windmills, most of which are produced in China. And for electric vehicles, she said China dominates the production of the batteries they use. But while China is the world's largest supplier of renewable technology, it is responsible for more emissions than the United States, European Union, India and United Kingdom combined. Badenoch said she will task her shadow ministers with finding achievable solutions for delivering cheap, clean energy without depending on hostile countries. Malcolm Hudson, NTD News, London.
China's naval capacity is quickly catching up to America's. This comes as China vows to take Taiwan, a major U.S. ally in the region, and China does not exclude using force. What does this all mean for the U.S.? NTD's Iris Stahl was joined by Eric Labs, Senior Analyst for Naval Forces and Weapons at the Congressional Budget Office, to discuss.
Eric Labs, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.
So first of all, in the past 2 decades alone, China has become such a dominant player in shipbuilding, now taking over half of the global commercial shipbuilding market, while the U.S. share has fallen to less than 0.1%. First, tell us what national security threats does this gap pose, and how would it actually impact us when it comes to potential conflicts in the region?
Well, I'm not sure how much China having about half of the commercial shipbuilding market is a major national security threat to the United States. I'm more concerned about the growth of the Chinese naval capacity, which is now a fleet larger than what the United States have in terms of the numbers of battle force ships. The Chinese shipbuilding industry is very robust, and that does give them sort of a great industrial capacity if there were, for example, to be a long-term war between China and either allies of the United States or the United States itself. They would have a great deal of capacity in which to be able to reconstitute any losses, which would not be as easily achievable for the U.S.
And walk us through the history behind all this. How did we even get here? How did the U.S. decline come about? And how did China rise up there when it comes to Navy and shipbuilding?
Well, the United States had a great deal of shipbuilding capacity coming out of World War II for all the obvious reasons you might expect from that massive military spending and military buildup there. The U.S. commercial shipbuilding then started to decline thereafter, and actually it was Japan and Korea that were sort of the first big players that competed against U.S. commercial shipbuilding. So they actually took a great deal of the market when you look back at the 60s and the 70s, for example. Somewhere around that late time period, China decided it wanted to get more involved in commercial shipbuilding, so it made a dedicated effort to build a shipbuilding industrial base and compete with Korea and Japan. So that today what we have is we have 3 big players. China has about half the commercial shipbuilding sector. Korea and Japan together have about another 45%, and then the rest of the world combined has about the remaining 5%.
Now, a group of veterans in the House of Representatives has come up with a new bill aimed at revitalizing the U.S. shipbuilding industry. And what do you think the impact of this bill will be if it's actually passed?
Well, the bill has a number of provisions in it that are aimed to sort of improve commercial shipbuilding, but also can improve naval shipbuilding and naval shipbuilding repair in the United States. And to the extent that those provisions, work towards, providing more repair capacity, more for naval ship construction, I think that would help and increase the workforce available to the naval shipbuilding industry. To the extent that the bill might create like a whole new demand signal for commercial shipbuilding in the United States, that I think might be a little bit of a trickier proposition, because the big problem facing U.S. naval ship construction today is that there's not enough workers in the U.S. shipyards that build Navy ships. So if we create a new demand signal for commercial ships, that creates a new demand signal then for shipyard workers, and that so they will kind of inevitably compete then with those that are being trying to be hired in the naval shipyards. So I'm not in a position to sort of say anything in favor of or against the SHIPS Act, but there are various provisions in there that could help, and the other provisions that might pose some other kinds of challenges. But it's going to take a number of years before you really start to see a significant increase in the number of naval ships in the United States.
Does that period, though, you think pose any threats for us in the short term? What if we need those Navy fleets in the short term and we are not being able to compete with China?
Well, the U.S. Navy is an extremely capable Navy. It is the finest Navy in the world. So in the short term, you have a situation where the U.S. Navy can certainly compete, I think, with any country on the globe. Over the longer term, if the United States is unable to correct its shipbuilding problems and China continues to build out its fleet aggressively, that's going to pose that poses a serious geopolitical challenge for us in any situation where the United States and China might be at loggerheads.
Well, definitely a sector that's worth more investments in the long term as well. Thank you so much, Eric Labs.
Thank you.
That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Alice Tang in for Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. For round-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you soon.